World history is a war between man and nature, says Oswald Spengler. But it's a war that man is destined to lose. One day, our cities and skyscrapers will lie in ruins, just like the palaces of old Memphis and Babylon, he claims. And the final climax is fast approaching. Oswald Spengler is best known for his magnum opus, Decline of the West, but it's a lesser-known work, Man in Technics, that might be more relevant to our times. Though short, it's monumental in scope. In it, he lays out his philosophy of technics, explains the West's unique relationship to technology, and predicts a chilling future. The first question Spengler answers is, what is technics? Technics, as he defines it, is simply the tactics of living. Its general form is shared by all animal species, stemming from the struggle of animal against nature, both other creatures and the environment itself. For in reality, technics is ancient. It extends far beyond mankind, back into the life of the animals, indeed of all animals. An organism uses technics to kill its prey, outwit a predator, build a nest, dig a hole, etc. Anything that overcomes a problem and helps the animal survive is a tactic of living. Animals use technics to battle nature just as soldiers use technics to battle their enemy. For mankind, technics is much more than tools. Technics is not to be understood in terms of tools. What matters is not how one fashions things, but the process of using them, not the weapon, but the battle. And Spengler believed our history often fails to appreciate the techniques of man, focusing only on his artifacts. Always it is a matter of purposive activity, never of things. And it is just this that is so often overlooked in the study of prehistory, in which far too much attention is paid to things in museums and far too little to the innumerable processes that must have been in existence, even though they may have vanished without leaving a trace. Spengler claims the biggest factor in how a creature approaches technics is whether that creature is a predator or a prey. Herbivores, or prey, are ruled by different senses than predators. Herbivores are ruled by hearing and smell, which indicate a general direction that they should run away from. But beasts of prey are ruled by sight, the eye, which helps them identify a target to run toward. These dichotomous sense perceptions birth two different worldviews. The herbivore inhabits a world of amorphous dangers, while the beast of prey rules over his domain, full of point-like targets. And man is the apex predator. That man is a predator ruled by the eye gives him a unique vantage, one of power, one in which the entire world is his prey. There is an infinite sense of power in this quiet wide-angle vision, a feeling of freedom that has its source in its superiority and its foundations in the knowledge of greater strength and consequent certainty of being no one's prey. The world is the prey, and in the last analysis it is owing to this fact that human culture has come into existence. This predator-prey paradigm is man's fundamental relationship with nature. Thus, man's history is a constant struggle to invent new techniques in order to overcome his prey, and it is this struggle which births culture. Man's first great technical development, though not necessarily of his own doing, was the hand. Just as the eye allowed him command of the world in a theoretical manner, the hand allowed man to command the world physically, practically. And with the hand came simultaneously the tool. This hand and tool combination separated man from all other creatures, as his ability to fashion tools gave him the freedom of choice. He could now select or even invent his weapon rather than settle for what nature provided. But this newfound freedom of creation also birthed something else, an alienation from nature. Spengler writes, "The soul strides forward in an ever-increasing alienation from all nature. The weapons of the beasts of prey are natural, but the armed fists of man with its artificially made, thought-out, and selected weapon is not. Every work of man is artificial, unnatural. Creative man has stepped outside the bounds of nature, and with every fresh creation he departs further and further from her, becomes more and more her enemy. That is his world history, the history of a steadily increasing, fateful rift between man's world and the universe. the history of a rebel that grows up to raise his hand against his mother. The next great technical development for man was the ability to work collectively, which emerged in tandem with complex language. Around 5 millennia before Christ, something interesting happened to humanity. Agriculture, animal husbandry, building projects, graves, and evidence of long-distance travel appear. The high cultures of Mesopotamia and Egypt burst onto the scene. A new world of technical processes has seemingly sprung up quickly. Man has achieved the ability to organize. What first allowed this ability was the development of speech in the form of the command, to impose one's will on another, and to have them acquiesce. Thus, mankind was divided into two distinct classes, directors and executants, the heads and the hands of society. Like the eye of the predator which commands the world in a theoretical way, the directors of society are leaders and planners. They initiate an enterprise. The executants, the workers, are like the hands that are commanded by the eye and do the will of the directors. This basic class division has ruled all of human society since. In every enterprise, planning out and carrying out are distinct elements, and as between these, practical thought henceforth takes the leading part. There is director's work and there is executant's work, and this fact has been the basic technical form of all human life ever since. These two social classes eventually give rise to all social organization, resulting in the tribe and finally the state. But with the creation of the collective we, man becomes a slave to his creation. The individual becomes subservient to the group. Spengler notes how in primitive societies, the individual mattered little or nothing. In the great Viking sea voyages, few ships ever made it to port. In the grand building projects of Egypt, many workers perished, and in times of drought or famine, whole tribes were wiped out. But all that mattered was that there were a few left to represent the whole. Individual losses could be replenished. Only the extinction of the entire group was a real defeat. In this way, man is a slave to culture. In this increasing interdependence lies the quiet and deep revenge of nature upon the being that has wrested from her the privilege of creation. This petty creator against nature, this revolutionary in the world of life, has become the slave of his creature. The culture, the aggregate of artificial, personal, self-made life forms, develops into a barred cage for the souls that would not be restrained. The beasts of prey, who made others his domestic animals in order to exploit them, has taken himself captive. One would think that with the increase of technics, mankind would be freer than ever. Wasn't it the freedom of choice born out of the hand and tool that initially made man the most powerful of all creatures? While man does increase his power with each technical achievement, he is not freer because technics does not save labor. This seems contradictory at first, but it becomes obvious from human nature that the need to create, make more efficient, and push further is never satisfied. Each new discovery contains the possibility and necessity of more to come. Every fulfilled wish awakens 1,000 more. Every triumph over nature incites others. And according to Spengler, it is the leaders of society who are the most restless. The great leaders, the directors of society, are most in need of more and more hands to carry out their ever-expanding technical enterprises. The culmination of man's technics is the development of the city, completely divorced from nature and far removed from the simple village life that man has known for millennia. It is here that organization reaches its most artificial form. Spengler describes cities as anti-natural and centers of rootless thought that draws the streams of life from the land and uses them up into itself. Cities are where luxury and wealth reign, and they consume as opposed to nature, which produces. Up until now, we have been speaking generally, but let us turn our attention to Western civilization. It is in this culture that Spengler believed man's war against nature will reach its ultimate climax, and finally, its conclusive end. No other culture has embraced technics quite like the West, which has raised technics to an almost religious level. The Western will to power continually pushes toward the infinite. A will to power which laughs at all bounds of time and space, which indeed regards the boundless and endless as its specific target, subjects whole continents to itself, eventually embraces the world and the network of its forms of communication and intercourse, and transforms it by the force of its practical energy and the gigantic power of its technical processes. Spengler called the West Faustian because he believed it was characterized by a restless drive towards the infinite and unattainable, a thirst for knowledge and expansion, mirroring the story of Goethe's Faust. It's no surprise Spengler would view the West in this manner, given he lived during a time when the British Empire and other colonial powers dominated, and subsequently industrialized, the earth. It seemed in his time that Western culture was swallowing the world. What made Western techniques especially unique is that the West sought not only to control nature's resources and materials, its plants, animals, metals, minerals, rivers, and lakes, but Western man aimed to enslave nature's forces too. According to Spengler, this is evident in the supreme Western science, dynamics, which is concerned with forces as opposed to static objects. Theories on magnetism, electricity, and gravity are all instantiations of the desire to harness nature's forces. From monks tinkering with the idea of perpetual motion to alchemists seeking to transmute elements, Western technics reach its culmination and final form in the pursuit of exploiting the mysterious laws that govern the universe. Spengler notes how even the West's conception of God was understood in terms of a force. In the medieval era onward, God came to be viewed less as the Lord who ruled the world from his throne, and more as an infinite, impersonal force that is omnipresent in the world. The investigation of arcane, godlike forces became the real spirituality of the West. Mixed with rationalism, it was a new materialistic religion. Spengler quotes an old German mystic, "In thy serving of God, God serves thee." And he likens Western man's view of technics to the Holy Trinity. Technics is eternal and immortal like God the Father. It delivers mankind like God the Son, and it illumines us like God the Holy Ghost. This unholy veneration of technics gave rise to what Spengler describes as a machine culture, the point where technics via machines begins to overturn the long-established order of man over nature. Civilization itself becomes a type of machine where all things that were once organic succumb to artificial organization. Even man's mind becomes infected by machine-like thinking. Spengler writes, "We think only in horsepower now. We cannot look at a waterfall without mentally turning it into electric power. We cannot survey a countryside full of pasturing cattle without thinking of its exploitation as a source of meat supply. We cannot look at the beautiful old handiwork of an unspoiled primitive people without wishing to replace it by a modern technical process." The new priests of this techno-cult are the inventors and engineers who alone understand the mechanisms that make the machines run, and without them, the machine culture would cease to function. For this reason, machine culture cannot last long. Due to the increasingly technical nature of man's organization, the chasm between the brains and the hands grows, and the hatred of leadership rises to the surface. In machine culture, the workers no longer understand what their work is doing, what it is for, and why they are doing it. Moreover, the workers do not understand that the leader's work is work at all, and that their own quality of life actually depends on the work of the organizers. All they know is that their labor makes the organizers rich and prosperous, leading to contempt. Not only that, but Spengler posits that the machine culture requires a high caliber and high quantity of engineers and inventors to maintain itself. These minds must be skilled at their work, which often requires years of dedication to master. He observed that in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this was indeed the case, but now the West was becoming tired of machine culture. Spengler writes, "The Faustian thought begins to be sick of machines. A weariness is spreading, a sort of passivism of the battle with nature. Men are returning to forms of life simpler and nearer to nature. They are spending their time in sport instead of technical experiments. The great cities are becoming hateful to them, and they would fain get away from the pressure of soulless facts and the clear, cold atmosphere of technical organization. And it is precisely the strong and creative talents that are turning away from the practical problems and sciences and towards pure speculation. Occultism and spiritualism, Hindu philosophies, metaphysical inquisitiveness under Christian or pagan coloring are coming up again. The flight of the born leader from the machine is beginning. Every big entrepreneur has occasion to observe a falling off in the intellectual qualities of his recruits. But the grand technical development of the 19th century had been possible only because the intellectual level was constantly becoming higher. Thus we have reached a great turning point in the development of technics, a final act that will see nature's revenge against man's mastery. According to Spengler, Western culture is ultimately a tragedy. In fact, every high culture is a tragedy, since they all end in some type of cataclysm or decline. But Western culture's reliance on technics will make nature's revenge especially brutal. The creature he has created now rises against its creator. Just as man revolts against nature, now machine revolts against man. The master of the world has become the slave of the machine, and the consequences are catastrophic. The mechanization of the world has come to a point of overtension. The topography, climate, plant and animal life, mineral composition, and natural resources of the planet have been irreversibly altered. Spengler believed all the forests would soon be gone and whole animal species extinguished like the great bison that once roamed the American plains. And climate impacts will decimate entire human groups just like the North American Indian or Native Australian were. The West is briefly shielded from these consequences due to its industrial monopoly. Its economic, military, and financial domination is based on this control of industry, of technics, and gives the Western man a luxurious lifestyle compared to the rest of the world. But this monopoly is coming to an end. Spengler notes how at the turn of the 20th century the West chose not to keep its technical knowledge to itself, but share it with the world. In every university, the techniques that he had previously hoarded to himself was given to everyone. This dissemination of industry was motivated by larger profits, but soon in place of finished products, Western industries began to export secrets, processes, methods, engineers, and managers. And so the now industrializing world outside of the West becomes a competitor in techniques. Spengler uses the example of Imperial Japan, who adopted Western industrial methods. Within a few decades, it was able to compete with Russia, and even achieved a technical superiority to them. Likewise, in India and China, industrial regions were growing that would make for stiff competition because of their ability to pay low wages. The West had thrown away its privilege, and here began the exploited world's revenge against it. The center of world production was shifting away from the West and toward the developing world. And with this shift, Spengler envisioned that unemployment in the West would be no mere crisis, but a catastrophe. Spengler believed that because the rest of the world did not share the West's inward spiritual need for technics, its Faustian spirit, it would mean the end of the machine culture once it left the grip of Western civilization. Spengler writes, "This machine technics will end with the Faustian civilization, and one day will lie in fragments, forgotten, our railways and steamships as dead as the Roman roads and the Chinese wall, our giant cities and skyscrapers in ruins, like old Memphis and Babylon." Awfully pessimistic, right? Spengler concludes that, though it is the West's destiny to die in this manner, he can embody the worldview of Achilles, to live a short life, full of deeds and glory, rather than a long, empty one. To delude oneself into believing he can change course is ultimately folly. Optimism is cowardice. Finally, Spengler offers the inspiring yet sobering parting advice for Western man. "We are born into this time and must bravely follow the path to the destined end. There is no other way. Our duty is to hold on to the lost position, without hope, without rescue, like that Roman soldier whose bones were found in front of a door in Pompeii, who, during the eruption of Vesuvius, died at his post because they forgot to relieve him. That is greatness. That is what it means to be thoroughbred. The honorable end is the one thing that cannot be taken from a man."